Hello friends and fellow bibliophiles, welcome back to Kat's Novel Adventures. In today's video I want to share with you everything that I read in the month of November. So what did I get up to with my reading in November? Well, I ended up reading 6 books. I participated in a reading project with my good friend Kelsi over at Salems Lot. I participated in 2 readathons, the More Montgomery Challenge, as well as Nonfiction November, and I participated in the Cozy Cottage Book Club as well as the Middle Grade March Book Club. I ended up with 5 5-star reads and 1 4-star read, and at the end of November, I had 90 books read on Goodreads. 90 books. My goal was 75. Now, I still have December to get through, so will I make 100 or not? My reading project with Kelsi involved reading Salems Lot by Stephen King, as well as watching both made-for-TV movies, and then we had a big live discussion on her channel, Slime and Slashers. Salems Lot is the perfect atmospheric read for the fall, or even really the spooky season. I actually started reading it at the very end of October and finished it in the first few days of November because our live stream was at the very beginning of November. But I had a great time revisiting this. This is a reread for me, but it was Kelsi's first time, so it was very interesting to see what her thoughts were on this story as well as the movies. But for those of you that don't know the premise of Salems Lot, it is about a young writer named Ben Mears who comes to Jerusalem's Lot, and he is going to write a book about an experience he had when he lived there as a youngster with his aunt. He actually had a bad experience in the Marston's house, and if you don't know what that house is all about, it was a house where a very bad man lived and all kinds of unsavory things took place there. But Ben has an experience that kind of traumatized him, and he's going to kind of write about that when he comes back to the lot. Well, about the same time that Ben shows up in town, so does 2 mysterious strangers, and they bring some evil shenanigans along with them, and before you know it, the town is running amok with vampires. But it's a great story, and I love it so much. If you want to hear more of my thoughts on it, please check out our live stream on Kelsi's channel. Again, Slime and Slashers. I gave it 5 stars. So please watch and see why it is my favorite. I'll leave a link to the video in the description box below. The More Montgomery Challenge was hosted by Mitzi at Mitzi Reads and Writes and Elizabeth at Lizzie Faye Loves Books. It was a month-long readathon celebrating the work and the birthday of L.M. Montgomery. I read 2 books for this delightful readathon because I really, really love L.M. Montgomery's writing. And the first book that I read was Jane of Lantern Hill. This was actually the group read for the readathon, and it counted for 3 of the prompts, and I was very excited to read this because it was delightful. It is charming, it's middle grade, and it is about the lovely Jane Stewart, who, along with her docile mother, live in an old dreary mansion on Gay Street in Toronto with her cold and haughty grandmother. Jane really can't do much right in the eyes of the grandmother, but she has always thought that her father was deceased until the day a letter arrives at the home, and it is informing her that her father would like Jane to come spend the summer with him on Prince Edward Island. And so at first she's nervous because she's like, why isn't he with us? Why did he leave my mom? There's kind of like grumblings and rumblings. And of course the grandmother isn't going to say anything nice about her father. But Anne goes to the island and he buys a cottage on Lantern Hill, and she absolutely falls in love with the area, her father, and the community, and she makes lots of new friends. Now, of course, once the summer is over, she has to go back to live with her mom and her grandmother. Her grandmother is very overbearing, but I loved it so very much because Jane is a very sweet, caring, just very inspiring character. She has a lot to offer people. She has a very sweet and comforting friendship with Jody, who lives next door to her. They're actually a comfort for each other because Jody is an orphan and she lives like in this boarding house next door. So she doesn't have all of the wealth that Jane has, but Jane doesn't put on airs about it. You know, she'll try to help Jody out every time that she can. They just become really great friends. In fact, she really does help Jody out when it gets towards the end of the novel, which I thought was very sweet. Also, I just found that every time Jane visited the island, she just got a little more confident and more capable and was able to be a little more independent and assertive with her grandmother. After her first visit, she really does very well at school. She makes friends, which she had not done before. I mean, she just really blossoms as a character, as a person. And I really thought that was great. So if you have not read any L.M. Montgomery, I would recommend checking out Jane of Lantern Hill. It really is sweet, and it was a 5-star read for me. The other book that I read for the challenge was Anne of the Island. This was also another delightful middle grade story. This book just continues the story of Anne Shirley. She is going to Redmond College where she's going to work on her BA, and she is going there with her friend Gilbert, and then she runs into her friend Priscilla, and she makes some new friends also, especially Philippa. She is just a silly girl. She's very beautiful, but she's just into the social life. But it's kind of good for Anne and Priscilla in a way that they end up rooming with Philippa because she ends up kind of helping their social life along a little bit. And it also allows Anne to meet some really nice young men. In fact, one of them becomes a love interest, but it really does show how Anne kind of leaves the childhood behind in Avonlea. You know, even though it is kind of bittersweet because she did not really want to leave Marilla and the twins, but she also she has ambition and she wants to be able to have a career. She wants to write, and this is her opportunity to do that. Now, she does get to come back to Avonlea from time to time, and she does discover that a friend of hers from school is very ill. At first, Anne doesn't really know what she can do for her, but because Anne is a friend to everyone, I don't know if she even knows someone that's not really her friend. I mean, she's friendly to pretty much everybody, but she really does help this young girl out in her darkest hour, and that really does say a lot about Anne as a person. Now, she also ends up having an issue with her longtime friend Gilbert, and that's because Gilbert is sweet on her and has been sweet on her for a very long time. And she kind of gets aggravated with him because he wants to be more than just friends. So they do have kind of a falling out, but then circumstances arise and Anne realizes what really is important, and that even though she thinks that she doesn't want to have the romantic aspect as part of her life, she really does deep down, and she really finds out who that special person is. So again, if you have not read any L.M. Montgomery, I strongly recommend checking out the Anne of Green Gables series, starting with, of course, Anne of Green Gables, but then just continue with the series because it really is wonderful. And this was another 5-star read for me. Now on to Nonfiction November, which was hosted by Olive of a Book Olive. This was another month-long readathon where you read all nonfiction stories. And I was excited to be able to participate for the very first time, and I chose 2 books for this readathon. The first book I want to talk about is Free Lunch by Rex Ogle. This was also the middle grade March book club selection for November. This is a poignant middle grade memoir, and it recounts Rex's 6th grade year where he is physically abused, he's living in poverty, and he's also witnessing domestic violence. What a powerful novel this is. It was an emotional read for me. There were some scenes that I cried because I just can't imagine any child going through what Rex had to endure during that school year or even beyond, possibly even before that. I mean, I don't think that the abuse and all that started specifically in that 6th grade year. But Rex lives with his mom, his stepdad, and his younger half-brother, Ford. They don't live in the best living conditions. They have very little. They don't have a lot of money for food, and Rex's mom tends to be a bit proud and doesn't want to accept help from anybody, even her mom, which is surprising because her mom is quite capable of helping them out, but his mom just refuses that anytime that she comes around, which is very sad because I do think if there was ever any kind of a positive role model in Rex's life, it would be his grandmother. But I found that despite the fact that there are a lot of circumstances that are just very sad about this book, and there are some very intense scenes that happen. In fact, there's even a scene with an educator that just made me very, very sad for Rex, that he could have a teacher that would be prejudiced against him because of how he looked or the fact that he came from poverty. I was also sad of the humiliation that he had to feel just because of the clothes that he wore, or the fact that he was really felt shame when he would go into the lunchroom and say that he was on the free lunch program. Despite all of that, there are some brief moments of hope and a little bit of humor. Rex does end up becoming friends with a classmate named Ethan, and Ethan does come from money, but he never makes Rex feel less than, and he embraces him as a friend, and I really do think that they have a wonderful friendship. It's something that really helps Rex build a little bit of confidence in himself. Also, there is a turning point towards the end. You know, his mom ends up getting a job, and I just wonder if the situation ends up getting better or if that was just kind of like a band-aid on a bigger problem. I don't know. And I also wonder how Rex's mom feels about the fact that he has told this story. While Free Lunch is well written and very compelling, I had a little bit of a problem with the language in the story. Now, I know that this is a real story. This is him telling it from his 6th grade self, and all of this really happened. But considering this is a middle grade novel, you have to be careful of what middle graders are reading it. Also, there are some situations that I think might be a little bit scary for some middle schoolers. So I just kind of think that perhaps parents or librarians or teachers might want to read this before putting it in the hands of a middle schooler. Just kind of know who the audience is, and I think it would be more appropriate for older middle grade or perhaps even more like a young adult. At the end of the novel, Rex talks about food insecurity. That was a term I was not familiar with. Sadly, we have lots of children that don't know where the next meal is coming from, which I think is just, you know, not acceptable living in the United States. Not acceptable living anywhere, but here in the United States where so much food goes to waste, I can't imagine why children are not being better taken care of. There should be no one really living in poverty, in my opinion, but, you know, who am I, right? But I have to say that I really admire Rex Ogle's courage for telling his story, because it had to be very hard for him to share such intimate details about his life and about his mom in particular. I just wonder like what their relationship is today. But I do think it's an important novel, and I do think it is going to be something that is helpful, for other children who may be in similar circumstances. I do want to read more of Rex Ogle's work, and I think that I want to read the next thing will be Punching Bag, which is more about domestic violence that he experienced, and I think it's more like in his junior high or perhaps in his high school years. But I have to say, overall, it was a good novel to read in the sense that it's a very compelling story. Not that the content is all that great. It's kind of hard to give a rating for something. You want to say, oh, this is the best book in that sense. But I gave it 4 stars, and I really do think it is worth a read. The other nonfiction book that I read was Life in 5 Senses: How Exploring the Senses Got Me Out of My Head and Into the World by Gretchen Rubin. What a title. But I have been wanting to read this ever since it was published at the beginning of 2023. And I'm so happy I finally got around to reading it, because this is Gretchen's self-experimentation with the senses. And she just seemed like she had a ball on this journey that she took, where she was trying to really kind of tune into her senses. And it all started because she visited her eye doctor, and she had like this, revelation there. And then she decided, you know what, I need to really pay attention to my senses a little bit better than I have been. So I just think it was a fun read. And there was just some parts in it, like she points out, like this one from the back where it says more memories. She says, our 5 senses link us to our past, tie us to the present, and help us create memories for the future. And that is so true, because I don't know about you, but there are certain smells, tastes, music that you hear, and it can bring you right back to your childhood or back to a specific event. That's how powerful your senses are. Or like if you're experiencing, a sad moment, which one of your senses are you going to turn to provide yourself some comfort? To me, it's like getting cozy with a blanket, and curling up with a great book or something like that. But I just thought that it was a lot of fun. I love Gretchen Rubin's writing. I've enjoyed her books over the years and her podcast. And then this was no exception. It was definitely a 5-star read for me. I love the fact that she has quotes in there that has to do with the senses, that she also has paintings and sculptures from her daily visits to the Met. There was also a 5 senses portrait that she did of her husband, which is an exercise where you can tap into all 5 of your senses about someone you care about or about an event in your life. I just thought that was pretty neat. And then she also provides a lot of resources. So if you wanted to have your own adventure with your 5 senses, she gives you all kinds of activities and things you can do to kind of jumpstart that. She also has a quiz, and this quiz tells you what your neglected sense is. And my neglected sense happens to be smell, which I was not at all surprised by that. So I guess now I just have to stop and smell the roses and do some little activities to kind of heighten that sense. I just thought that was very fascinating, very interesting, and I love some of the activities that she got up to. So if you're interested in the science of your 5 senses and how your life can have a little more whimsy or joy added to it from, exploring your senses. I mean, I do think that it can help you be a little more mindful, which makes you a little more present. And You know, when you're a little more present, you enjoy life and the little things as well as the big things. So I would definitely check out Life in Five Senses if this sounds like something that you'd be interested in reading. The last book I want to share with you is the book that I read for the Cozy Cottage Book Club, which is Little House in the Big Woods by Laura Ingalls Wilder. This copy was lent to me by Andrew's girlfriend, so thank you, Megan, for letting me read your copy. It is the first book in the heartwarming Little House series, and it is told from the perspective of Laura, who happens to be 4 years old back in 1871. And it is so delightful. I loved revisiting the story. It is one of my favorite series from my childhood, but it really does tell you about life on the American frontier. You know, pioneer life was not easy. So this kind of captures the joys as well as the struggles. And I just loved learning all about pioneer life because this book is chock full of information. You know, how they got their food, the process they went through to preserve their food, what it was like for them to go shopping in town, how neighbors helped one another. But life was just simple back then, and there was a lot of joyful moments that the family experienced together. There's a lot of storytelling, singing, dancing. Pa plays his fiddle. They get together with their families. Christmas is celebrated in this book, and it's just wonderful. I mean, it's delightful to see how Laura receives her very first doll, because I think before she had like a corncob doll, but she gets her first real doll for Christmas, and it's just very exciting. I just love the stories that are told. I think there are like 4 of them in the book, especially the one with Grandpa and the sled and the pig. That one is hilarious, especially because Pa kind of tells stories around something that might be currently happening with them. And this particular story had to do with being quiet and not doing much on Sundays when you're supposed to be resting. I really loved it. I loved revisiting it, as I said before. We had an enjoyable meeting, and one of the best surprises was that Laura Ingalls Gunn, who is a relative of Laura Ingalls Wilder, attended our meeting. And it was so neat to hear some of the stories that she had been told. I think it's her great-great-grandfather was brothers with Laura's great-great-grandfather, something like that. So she's not a direct descendant. She is a relative. We learned that. And she also has her own YouTube channel, which is Laura Ingalls Gunn. Her channel is just really kind of neat because she does some videos on Laura Ingalls Wilder. In fact, I watched the video about this story. She had done some cooking, and then she showed some furniture, and she read some parts from the book. I just thought that was really neat. So I'll leave information about her channel as well as that video in the description box below. But she mainly talks about interior decorating, crafting, and sewing. And it's not just about this time period. Some of the, clothing that she has made or she's worn is really neat. So if you want to check that out, please look in the description box for a link to her channel. But as I said, it was just a delight to revisit this story. We had a good time, and I gave it 5 stars, and I can't wait to read the rest of the series. I read The Long Winter back in February for the Laura Ingalls Wilder readathon that they had, and enjoyed that as well. So now I got to get into the second book and read the rest of the series again. Well, friends, that's a wrap on everything I read in November. How about you? Did you have some 5-star reads? Did you read any of the books that I read in November? Let me know in the comments below. As always, I appreciate you stopping by. I look forward to seeing you again. In the meantime, stay amazing and be adventurous.